Since our special report on the Black Lives Matter protests in Portland last week, there have been plenty of developments as the situation has continued to escalate. Here's what's happened just recently. An anti-racism protester has been shot dead after a car sped towards a crowd and opened fire in Texas. President Donald Trump has been criticised for the use of police and federal agents in a new surge to disperse protesters. They've been accused of using violent tactics. Meanwhile, US media reports chemical agents have been used against protesters in Virginia, and here at home the Supreme Court has blocked planned protests by the Black Lives movement in Sydney, saying the risk of COVID-19 infection is too high. Protest organisers say they plan to go ahead anyway. But look, let's turn our attention to Portland in the US, where protesters continue nightly. And once again, we're joined by Portland journalist Garrison Davis. Welcome to the Ben Robin Robber Show, Garrison.
Yeah, thank you.
Garrison, we were planning to have you on location where the protests will be beginning, but you had a pretty rough night there last night. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so there was originally a march kind of planned in the northeast section of Portland, quite a bit away from downtown, and I was thinking I was probably going to stay in the northeast, but we ended up marching almost 5 miles back to the courthouse, where all the main protests have been happening. And so, everyone was really tired. That was part of that march. I was part of that march, so I was kind of tired. And there was a massive, physical display of force used that night from both federal officers and the Portland Police Bureau. Because at around 1 to 2 a.m. In Portland, part of the fence around the courthouse got pulled down. So they did one of the largest displays of force that I've seen from the federal officers, and also the Portland Police Bureau joined.
You were talking to our producer that you basically, you and some other journalists need a bit of a rest day. How has it gotten to that point? I imagine covering these protests is pretty full on. Why have you guys all just sort of hit that point? It is Sunday night over there where you're all gathering just to chill out for a bit, aren't you?
Yeah, that's kind of the plan.
It must be intense doing that kind of reporting. But look, there's a lot to talk to you about. And let's begin with Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler being tear-gassed. Let's take a look at what happened. He later said, with 100% honesty, I saw nothing that provoked this response. I'm not afraid, but I am pissed off. Garrison, it's quite extraordinary to me that the mayor of a city can be tear-gassed.
Yeah, after a few months, this is kind of the first time he's been down for a protest. And this case is specifically really interesting because he's not just the mayor of Portland, he's also the police commissioner. And we've seen tear gas from the Portland Police Bureau months before the federal officers used tear gas. So I think that this is his first time really feeling what it's like, and yeah, he didn't seem to like it very much.
So Garrison, we heard in that video someone say, "How do you like that now?" Or sorry, how is that now? What's the relationship between the protesters and the mayor at the moment?
No one in Portland's a really big fan of the mayor, and specifically because he's been tear gassing the city for months because he's in charge of the Portland Police Bureau. His kind of nickname right now is Tear-gassed Ted because of how much tear gas his police department used. So when you're saying when people are saying how do you like that now, it's it's referencing, hey, you've been doing this to people since May 29th. This is what we've been dealing with. This is the first time you're kind of experiencing it, and yeah, it's not very fun.
Do you think it would be any different, or would it be worse if the mayor was a Republican mayor?
That's not really how things work in the States, because usually big cities are run by Democrats because big cities have more diversity, so Democrats are more likely to be elected. There's very few kind of large cities that have Republican mayors, especially large cities that would have these kind of protests. So I'm not really sure. I could speculate, but I've never really seen. Yeah, it's not really a thing that we see very often.
Sure.
And it would really depend on how the Republicans would be willing to work alongside the feds, or if they would try to push back from the feds. depending if if it's more like a states' rights Republican or if it's more just like a conservative who's like okay with the federal government coming in and setting up base here.
Garrison, you spoke last week about how the Portland Police Bureau had pulled back a bit and left it to the agents. The police are now involved again. Has this helped or hindered the situation?
I mean, it's certainly escalated things. Like I've seen more physical violence from the Portland police last night, like towards me specifically, than the federal officers have like targeted me with like physical force. Like pushing, shoving, like that kind of stuff. I mean, and what's interesting is like we've been told repeatedly by city officials that there's no communication between the police and between the federal officers. And I mean, obviously, this isn't the case, as what we saw not only last night, but the night before. I mean, I have a lot of footage of them working together, whispering into each other's ears, very clearly doing communication and working together to kind of, quote unquote, like handle these protests.
Well, we spoke last week when you joined us about the fact federal agents are attacking journalists and press, yourself included. Since then, a restraining order has been issued against these agents, blocking them from dispersing, arresting, threatening to arrest or use force against legal observers and journalists. Have you seen a difference?
Yeah, so the federal restraining order that's in place is the same one that was put in place for the Portland Police Bureau. And there's not really been much of effect that I could observe from the federal officers. The federal officers are more just kind of wildly shoot into the crowd. But also, I mean, I was maced by federal officers last night. They specifically walked up to a group of press, moving back, and they deliberately sprayed mace on me. So I haven't seen much of a difference there. The interesting thing about the police is last night, the police were trying to get me to like disperse off of a section of the city, which they're not legally allowed to do. And I kept on repeatedly informing them of this as they continued to yell at me. And whenever I would mention the federal restraining order, they would always back off a little bit. I mean, they were super angry. They were super upset. They really wanted to arrest me. Like you could see it in their eyes.
Wow.
But every time I mentioned you have a federal restraining order, they did back off, and it was kind of interesting to watch.
Well, talking about the police and the federal agents, the United Nations has come out and warned them against their action that they're currently undertaking. Do you think that will change anything, Garrison?
I really don't think it's going to have much of an effect. I mean, we have lots of Oregon state officials kind of threatening and warning, but I mean, the United Nations kind of has less power in this like situation even than the Oregon state officials have. And we're even seeing them not really be able to do much like currently. I mean, there's many lawsuits in place from both, private entities, the ACLU, the Oregon State. There's a lot of stuff like trying to happen, but I really don't think it's going to have much of an effect in the short term.
I'm really interested in this use of leaf blowers that I've seen on your Twitter feed. They're being used to protect crowds from the tear gas, and we're now seeing federal officers doing the same. Tell me about the use of these leaf blowers. This is extraordinary ingenuity.
Yeah, so this was ripped from the Hong Kong protests, but I've seen way more leaf blower use here than I have in Hong Kong. And I think it's because in America, tons of people just have leaf blowers. Like it's just kind of part of the suburban kind of stuff you have in your garage. So I'm seeing tons of men in their 40s, 50s, 30s coming out here with their leaf blowers and really effectively moving tear gas away from crowds. It's been astonishing to watch. The past week I've seen so many leaf blowers. Last night there's probably like 30 people just in a line just blowing billows and billows of gas back at the federal agents, and it's been so effective that the first 7 floors of the federal courthouse are now inhabitable because there's been so much tear gas that the officers have used that's just getting blown back at the courthouse that people can't work in the first 7 floors of this building because they're just soaked in tear gas. And yeah, we've seen the feds try to replicate this with their own leaf blowers, but I've only seen 2 leaf blowers from their side. And when you have 2 leaf blowers versus 30 leaf blowers, of course the 30 leaf blowers is going to win. Yeah, but it's been astounding how effective these have been. I've been kind of shocked.
Garrison, are you part of the protest movement, or are you covering this as an independent journalist?
I'm just covering this as an independent journalist. I've been covering this since May. I mean that's one thing with like with like the federal restraining order, of course, it doesn't apply if you're, if you're directly trying to interfere with an officer. It doesn't apply if you're like committing crimes. Like if you're, if you're throwing a water bottle at a police officer, that's not going to help you. That's not, if you have a press pass, that's not going to shield you if you're doing something like that. But yeah, I've just been participating. I've never. The first time I yelled at police these whole past 2 months was last night, and I was yelling them about the federal restraining order as they're charging towards me, and then I'm saying, no, you have a federal restraining order. You're not allowed to arrest press. That's the first time. That's the most direct engagement I've had with the police, and that was still within like my my job as a journalist in that instance, because I was recording and. I wanted to see what was going to happen and see if they're actually going to try to arrest me. We'll see. Yeah.
Well, they're obviously being very wary of that because you had the facts with you. We've seen lots of cases of police doing the wrong thing, but on the whole, are they doing the right thing? I want to know, just before we wrap up, I just want to know, why is this getting out of hand? We've seen today, cars ramming through crowds. We've seen people shot over the weekend. Why is this so out of control in the US with these protests?
I mean, it's a big movement, and I mean, the US has a lot of cultural conflicts right now between different ideologies. So yeah, I mean, I've been looking into the thing that happened in Austin with with the car and the person that attacked the crowd. Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. There's a lot of America is very divided in our beliefs right now. The president has definitely encouraged that division. And I mean, but I've never felt protected at these protests by the police. Even as a journalist, I've only been threatened kind of by them. Even when there's like kind of like violent moments between like small infighting or something. We've had cars try to run people down, and it's always been participants that have offered kind of the most safety to the crowd. I've never really felt safe around the police right now. I mean, they're still just kind of wildly shooting and. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, they're obviously not handling these well because they're just kind of escalating things and they're just making things worse. The most peaceful nights that I've seen is when police just didn't engage, then really no violence happens. Maybe some wood's going to get spray painted on, but nothing bad happens. But and I'm not sure why they continue to want to come out as often as they do, because I mean the nights that I've had the least destruction is when they just stay in their building.
All right. Well, Garrison, you are live blogging this on Twitter at Hungry Bowtie. It's well worth following and well worth a read. Thank you. Keep safe and keep us informed. Thank you, Garrison, for being on the Ben, Rob and Robbo show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
It's the Ben, Rob and Robbo